Some childhood memories fade over time, but some are burned into your mind forever, refusing to leave. This is one of those memories. I was around 7 or 8 years old when it happened. My older brother Austin and I grew up in a broken home. Our dad, gone, disappeared from our lives without a trace. Our mom was everything. She worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. Sometimes those jobs included night shifts, and on those nights, our grandma would stay over to watch us. Our house was small, just enough for the 3 of us. But considering my mom's single paycheck, it was decent. What wasn't decent was the area we lived in. Sketchy, dangerous. The kind of place where you'd hear things outside your window at night and just hope they'd keep moving. That night started like any other. I can't recall if it was a school night or a weekend, but I remember being in the living room. My grandma sat on the couch watching TV, and I was playing with my Legos, completely in my own world. I was noisy, too noisy, because she kept shushing me. "Alex, quiet down. You're gonna wake Austin." Austin was already in bed. His bedtime was earlier than mine. I had the luxury of staying up until 9:30. Looking back, it was probably a weekend. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been up so late. Our house had a simple layout. Living room, dining room, and kitchen all connected in an open space. Then a hallway stretched down toward the bedrooms. My mom's room was at the very end, mine was in the middle, and Austin's was the first door off the hall. When Grandma stayed over, she slept in Mom's room. Eventually, it was my bedtime, too. Grandma tucked me in, said goodnight, and went to the bathroom to brush her teeth before heading to bed herself. I wasn't scared of the dark back then. Never had been. My mom always said I was a brave kid. But that night changed everything. I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night. Strange, considering I was always a heavy sleeper. At first I thought it was just the house settling, the way old houses groan under their own weight. But then I heard it creak, 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 the floorboards. Someone was in the hallway. At first I thought it was my grandma, maybe going to the bathroom, but the creaks didn't stop. They kept shifting back and forth, like someone pacing, slowly. Then came the whispering, low, incoherent. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. Maybe she was talking to Austin, but something felt wrong. I got up and crept toward my door, pressing my ear against it. The whispering continued, closer now, and then I heard a sound that wasn't my grandma's voice. "Jeremy, Jeremy." My skin went cold. Who the hell was Jeremy? I finally cracked open the door, and that's when I saw her. A tall, pale woman, barefoot, skinny to the point where her ribs protruded under her pale skin. She was naked, facing the wall, her head pressed between her arms, whispering, "Jeremy, Jeremy." And then, as if she sensed me, her head snapped around violently. Her face was gaunt, hollow cheeks stretched tight over sharp bones, eyes wide, bloodshot. She stared at me. I screamed. Imagine you're in that moment, frozen, staring at a figure that shouldn't be there. Would you have screamed, or would you have stayed silent? Let me know in the comments how you would have reacted, because what happened next still haunts me to this day. I slammed my door shut, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the lock. Bang! She pounded on the door. "Jeremy, Jeremy, open the door. Let me in." I could hear her nails scraping against the wood. I screamed for my grandma, my voice cracking with terror. Suddenly there was another sound, my grandma's voice, loud and angry. "Get out of here! Leave this house!" The pounding stopped. But then the woman shrieked, voice twisting into something unnatural. "Where's Jeremy? Give me Jeremy!" My grandma was tough, even in her 60s. I heard her shouting, calling the police while the woman continued her deranged screaming. And then, just like that, the noise stopped. By the time the police arrived, the woman was long gone. Grandma found the back door unlocked. She said it was her fault. She must have forgotten to check it before bed. But the look on her face, I think she knew it was more than that. After that night, I couldn't sleep alone. The image of that pale, twisted face haunted me every time I closed my eyes. We moved out of that house not long after, but sometimes I still wonder who was Jeremy and why did she want him so badly. When I was 19, I thought I was fearless. Horror movies, jump scares, ghost stories, none of it fazed me. I loved the thrill, and honestly, it made me feel tougher, especially around girls I was interested in. Fear. That was someone else's problem, or so I thought. Until that night. My friend Megan had always struggled with something far scarier than any horror movie: sleep paralysis. She once told me how sounds, lights, even the feeling of someone nearby could twist her dreams into pure nightmare fuel. But I had never experienced it. In fact, I brushed it off as just another creepy sleep condition until she texted me late one night. Her message was simple. "Can you come over? It happened again. I'm scared." I didn't hesitate. When I arrived, her room was quiet, almost too quiet. Megan was lying perfectly still on her bed, breathing softly, her face pale but peaceful. It didn't seem like a nightmare to me, just deep sleep. So I sat on the stool near her dresser, playing a game on my phone, figuring she'd wake up and I could head home soon. About 30 minutes passed. The house felt heavy. Ever feel like you're being watched when no one's there? That's when it hit me. The air felt colder. A shiver ran down my spine. I was about to leave, but suddenly, Megan screamed. Not a normal scream. This one was wrong, muffled, like she couldn't fully open her mouth. Her eyes snapped wide, glassy and unfocused. She thrashed weakly, her body trembling like she was trapped in some invisible grip. I rushed to her side, shaking her shoulders gently. "Megan, wake up. It's just a dream." Her body felt ice cold. No response, just shaking. What would you have done? Would you have stayed or run for help? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious how many of you would have handled this differently. After what felt like forever, though it was probably 30 seconds, she gasped and snapped out of it. I stayed a bit longer, made sure she was okay, and finally left for home around 1 a.m. I thought it was over. I was so wrong. Minutes after getting home, I got a text. "The hallucinations won't stop." No explanation, no reply when I texted back. Something felt wrong, so I turned around and drove back to her place. This time, something was different. As I pulled up, red and blue lights painted her porch. Police cars. My stomach dropped. I ran up to find Megan, pale as a ghost, speaking with an officer. When she saw me, she pulled me aside. Her voice was shaking. You don't understand. I wasn't asleep earlier." Chills, absolute chills. She continued, voice cracking. "When you were in my room, there was a man hiding in my closet." My heart stopped. The police had just taken him into custody. Some homeless man, pale, gaunt, with a large kitchen knife tucked in his jacket. He had been watching her sleep, watching me. The only reason he didn't strike? My presence scared him enough to stay hidden. But Megan had seen him. She thought it was her sleep paralysis. Until I left. That's when he started creeping closer. That's when she called the police. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't shown up when I did. Maybe nothing, or maybe something much, much worse. You ever get the feeling that someone is watching you? Not just in a creepy way, but like someone who shouldn't be there. A few years ago, my mom, brother, and I moved from downstate to upstate New York. It was a quiet neighborhood, the kind where most of the residents were older couples who'd lived there for decades. Our house had belonged to an elderly couple too, but they didn't pass away. They just left. The house itself was cozy, but something about it always felt just a bit off. Not wrong, exactly. Just a lingering sense of being watched when no one was there. At first, nothing too strange happened. But you know how the quiet ones tend to hide the worst secrets. In our first year there, the only weird thing was the footsteps. My mom's bedroom was upstairs, and I often hung out in the basement. Whenever I was home alone, I'd hear slow, deliberate footsteps above me. Heavy, uneven, almost like someone with a limp. At first, I told myself it was just the house settling. Old houses creak, right? But deep down, it didn't feel like the house. It felt like someone pacing. Then came Thanksgiving morning. I was in charge of loading all the food into the car for a family dinner. Pies, casseroles, you name it. I was being extra careful not to mess anything up. It was a cold morning, and I remember my breath fogging up in the air as I worked. I had just placed the last pie carefully on the seat when I heard it. A voice, an older woman's voice, soft but sharp, speaking right behind me. You'd better be careful with that. It was teasing, almost playful, but there was something off about it. I remember rolling my eyes, thinking it was just a neighbor. Without turning around, I smiled politely, ready to chat. But when I turned around, no one was there. I scanned the entire street, expecting to see an old woman shuffling away. But there was nothing. Just empty sidewalks and the sound of the wind in the trees. For a moment I tried to laugh it off, but the voice had been so clear, so close. I started to convince myself it had to be my brother messing with me, maybe trying to sound like an old lady. I checked the porch, the garage, even peeked behind the car, but he wasn't there. And then my mom came outside. I asked her if she had just called out to me. She gave me a weird look and shook her head. That was the first time I felt real, actual fear in that house. But things were just getting started. What would you have done? Brushed it off? Or searched harder? Have you ever heard a voice when no one was there? Drop your scariest experience in the comments. A month later, during winter break, I was home alone again. It was late. The kind of quiet where the house almost feels like it's holding its breath. I was curled up in bed when I heard it. Soft sobbing. At first I thought it was the wind or maybe my mom. It sounded muffled, like someone crying into a pillow. I was just about to get up and check on her when my phone buzzed. Mom, hey, are you okay? I froze. I texted back, yeah, why? Her reply made my skin crawl. I heard crying. I thought it was you. It wasn't. We tried to rationalize it. Wind, pipes, even a coyote outside. But deep down, we both knew it wasn't any of those things. The crying had sounded too human and way too close. One night I finally asked my mom what she thought about all of it. The footsteps, the voice, the crying. She hesitated before saying, I think it might be Grandma. Our grandmother had passed away 6 months after we moved in. Mom believed she was watching over us. She even mentioned hearing faint knocking on her bedroom door sometimes, as if someone was trying to get her attention. But I never told my mom the truth. I don't think it was Grandma. Grandma never came to this house. She was already sick when we moved. And besides, the voice I heard on Thanksgiving, that wasn't hers. Grandma's voice was gentle, comforting. The voice I heard was different, sharper, colder. Someone else, something else was in that house with us. And sometimes, when it gets really quiet, I wonder if it ever left. So what do you think? Was it a spirit tied to the house? Or something darker? Drop your theories in the comments below. And if you've had a similar experience, I want to hear your story too. But be careful, because sometimes the things we talk about have a way of listening. When I was about 12 years old, living in Kansas, something happened that still disturbs me to this day. It was one of those days where everything felt normal. I was in my room, sitting on the floor, fully immersed in my game, Halo, on my old Xbox. My parents were out running errands, and my older sister was at work, so I was home alone. Well, not completely alone. I had our 2 dogs with me. One was a little terrier, and the other was a Bichon Frise. Neither were the types to guard the house, more like little alarms that would bark at anything unusual. It was a pretty safe neighborhood. Nothing out of the ordinary had ever really happened, except for that one time when someone spray-painted KKK graffiti on some park equipment nearby. But that was a distant memory. I was in the zone, Doritos in one hand, controller in the other, completely absorbed in my game. That's when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of the front door opening and then closing. It was the kind of sound you would expect if someone had just walked in. The dogs perked up instantly, bolting into the living room. My first thought was that my parents had returned early. Maybe their errands were done quicker than expected. But something felt off. My gut twisted, but I shook it off. Still, just to be sure, I called out, "Mom? Dad? Is that you?" Silence. I called again, a bit louder this time, but no response. My voice echoed through the house, sending a chill down my spine. That's when I began to feel uneasy. My dogs weren't barking like they usually would when someone came home. Just staring at the empty hallway, not a sound from them. My heart began to race. I paused the game and stood up. I walked into the living room, but there was no one there. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Something wasn't right. I wasn't wearing headphones, and the TV was turned down low. I had some music playing softly in the background, so I knew for sure the sound hadn't come from the game. I was beginning to doubt my own senses, but the sinking feeling in my gut only deepened. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I needed to be prepared. I dashed to my parents' closet, grabbed the first thing I could find, my dad's baseball bat, and held it like I knew what I was doing. I called my dad first, but there was no answer. Then my mom, nothing. I tried my two best friends, but they didn't pick up either. Panic began to creep in. What if something had happened to all of them? I could feel the walls closing in, and my 12-year-old mind raced to the worst possible conclusion. For the first time in my life, I decided to call 911. "Stay calm," the operator said. "The police are on their way." But staying calm was getting harder by the second. My mind kept drifting back to the hallway near the front door. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was hiding there, just waiting to jump out and scare me. Or worse, my two dogs were right next to me, staring intently at the same hallway. That's when the panic set in. If the dogs were acting like something was wrong, I knew I wasn't imagining things. They were usually pretty relaxed, but now they were tense, frozen, not moving an inch. I couldn't take my eyes off the hallway. I stood there, paralyzed with fear, as every second seemed to drag on forever. It was only a few minutes, but it felt like an eternity. The operator kept reassuring me to stay calm, but the fear was overwhelming. Then out of nowhere, the front door creaked open. My dad walked in, looking confused. "What the heck are you doing?" I quickly told him everything. The strange noise, the feeling of someone being in the house. Without wasting a second, he grabbed his pistol from the front room, and we got ready to check the house. It was exactly like those movies where people clear rooms. But let me tell you, it's terrifying when you're actually doing it in real life. Every time we opened a door, my heart raced. Was someone waiting on the other side? Were they hiding in the closet, ready to jump out? We didn't find anyone. There was no sign of forced entry, no indication that anything had been disturbed. But my nerves didn't settle. Something wasn't right. The police arrived shortly after, and after a thorough search, they gave us an explanation. At least, the one they believed to be true. Apparently, someone had been going around the neighborhood, checking if houses were empty. If the door was unlocked, they would slip inside and steal things. It had been happening for weeks, but I couldn't shake one thought. I had only heard the door open and close once. But what if there was someone still hiding, watching me from the shadows? What if they'd been in the house the entire time, just waiting for the right moment to show themselves? But here's where I need your help. 444. What do you think really happened that night? Was it just an intruder looking for an easy score? Or was something far more sinister lurking in my house? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think someone was in the house the whole time? Or was I just letting my imagination get the best of me? About 10 years ago, I moved out of my mom's house into my first apartment in Chicago. It was a nice 3-bedroom on the south side, in a friendly neighborhood near the University of Illinois. I shared it with 2 roommates, Tom and Mike. Mike was a close friend of mine, but Tom, he was Mike's friend, and I hadn't met him before moving in. Still, we got along just fine. One night, about a month after moving in, I went out with a few friends for drinks at a bar about 10 minutes from my apartment. It was a fun time, but I ended up getting a bit more drunk than I'd intended. Around 1 a.m., I decided it was time to head home, so I grabbed a cab. I stepped out of the cab and walked up to my apartment. As I entered, I noticed that Tom's door was open. He was staying at his girlfriend's place. Mike's door, on the other hand, was shut tight, and I could see the flickering light from his TV shining under the crack. I made my way to my own bedroom, put on some TV, and settled in to prepare for sleep. About 10 minutes passed, and suddenly I heard my doorbell ring. It was 1:30 a.m. I was half asleep, confused, so I ignored it. A few seconds later, it rang again, and then again. Now let me set the scene. Mike, my roommate, was a big-time stoner. He also made money on the side dealing weed, so it wasn't uncommon for him to get random customers at strange hours. I figured that Mike had probably fallen asleep waiting for one of them to show up, but it didn't explain the urgency of the doorbell ringing. I dragged myself to the intercom and grumbled, "Who's there?" A girl's voice responded, soft but clear. "It's Emma. I'm here to see Mike." My suspicions were confirmed. Still, I thought it was just one of Mike's random hookups or customers, and the voice sounded polite enough, so I headed down the stairs to let her in. The apartment building's front door was made of tall glass, and from the stairwell you could easily see out onto the street. As I opened the door, I saw her, a young, attractive blonde with glasses, standing outside waiting patiently. She looked harmless enough, and I wasn't too concerned. Mike had plenty of random girls over. I held the door open for her. "Okay, follow me," I said, and turned to head back up the stairs. But as I reached the landing and turned the corner, something felt off. I glanced over my shoulder and she wasn't following me. She was still standing outside, staring at something to her right as if waiting for someone. My heart skipped a beat. Was I being too trusting? Why wasn't she following me? Then I heard it. The door behind me swung open. I whipped my head around and froze in my tracks. A tall, gangly man with greasy, long hair, his eyes sunken deep into his face, was rushing up the stairs toward me. He was wearing a sleeveless black t-shirt, and the cheap tribal tattoos creeping up his arms seemed almost mocking in the dim light. But it was the weapon in his hand that made my blood run cold. He was holding what looked like a lead pipe. Panic surged through my veins. I bolted up the stairs, adrenaline pumping, but I could hear him getting closer. His footsteps were heavy and fast. Should I have trusted the girl, or was this all part of a setup? I reached my door and slammed it shut, barely locking it in time as he arrived at the top of the stairs. His heavy breathing was the only sound as he slammed the lead pipe against the door, shouting obscenities at me. I was paralyzed with fear, trapped in my own apartment. Was this really happening? He finally gave up after several more strikes and ran down the stairs. Instead of coming down to let her in himself, Mike buzzed Emma up after hearing her name. He thought she was a friend of mine. When she reached the door to our apartment, Mike opened it. That's when things got even stranger. She seemed confused. Mike said she kept looking around, almost like she wasn't sure where she was. She even reached behind her, trying to keep the door open as if expecting someone else to come inside. So who was she, really? Mike told her no one named Tim lived there. She stayed near the entrance of our unit for a few moments longer before leaving in a hurry. I'm pretty sure this Emma was just the bait. They tried their trick earlier in the day, but they hadn't counted on someone being awake to buzz them in. They must have assumed I'd just let them into the building. We were lucky that night. But what if the next time there's no one around to stop them? We immediately called the police, who came by to take our statements. They asked if we knew anyone who might want to harm us. Of course, we answered no. This seemed like a random attack. The cops left shortly after, saying there wasn't much they could do. And we never saw that girl, Emma, or the man with the lead pipe again. But here's where it gets interesting. Was Emma just the bait? Or was there something more sinister going on? What do you think their plan really was? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Was I just lucky? Or was this some kind of twisted setup? And if they came back, how would you have handled it? It was the summer of 2021, and I was 25, living alone in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The kind of place where you think nothing bad could ever happen, right? But this night, this experience, is something that still haunts me to this day. It was June 15th. The sun had already set, leaving behind the oppressive summer heat. The kind of heat that clings to your skin no matter what you do. I was wearing just a tank top and shorts, but I could still feel the sweat pouring down my back. My parents were away in France on vacation, leaving me alone in the house. After a long day of exams and a volleyball match, I was completely drained. The exhaustion was overwhelming, and as I ate my dinner while scrolling through social media in my room, I could feel my eyelids getting heavier. I collapsed into bed shortly after, not realizing how deeply tired I was. But then, something jolted me awake. It was around 3 a.m. and I was startled by the muffled sounds of thunder rolling through the sky. A cold breeze swept through my room. Despite the scorching heat earlier, I opened my eyes, the world still spinning from sleep, and noticed the shutters banging wildly against the window. The power was out. I could see it through the darkness. The street lamps were off. A blackout. I grabbed my phone and stumbled out of bed, my legs shaky with the lingering effects of exhaustion. The house was eerily quiet, except for the wind howling outside. I shuffled down the hallway to close the windows before the rain started, but something caught my eye. The mosquito net in my living room window. Why was it lifted? I swore I had left it down earlier. My heart started to race, but I shook it off. It was probably nothing, right? I turned my flashlight towards the living room. The furniture was where I had left it, nothing out of place. Still, a sense of unease crept over me. I stepped closer to the window, peering out into the dark yard. The trees swayed violently in the wind, their leaves shaking. Suddenly I froze. A flash of bright light caught my attention from the attic. It was brief, almost like lightning, but no thunder followed. Just that flash, bright and unnervingly close. My first instinct was to dismiss it, but something felt wrong. The attic was pitch black. I had seen that flash from a window up there, so why no rumbling thunder? I turned back, my stomach tightening. What if it wasn't lightning at all? What if someone was up there? I felt a cold wave of dread wash over me as I pieced it all together. The open mosquito net, the strange light in the attic, and now, no thunder. My mind screamed one horrifying thought: intruder. I stood there, frozen for a moment, before a faint sound broke the silence. The creak of a doorknob turning. I whipped my head towards the living room, my breath catching in my throat. Outside, through the glass, a shadowy figure stood just beyond the door. Panic gripped me. What was happening? Were there others inside the house? Was I about to be robbed? Or worse? I didn't have much time. My heart pounded in my chest as I tiptoed toward the stairs leading to the basement. The phone in my hand was my only source of light. trembling with fear as I quickly dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? The operator asked, trying to calm me down. There's someone in my house, I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. I think they're upstairs. The operator assured me the police would be there in less than 10 minutes and told me to find a safe room. I almost replied that I could escape through the garage, but suddenly I lost the call. I checked my phone, no signal. My stomach dropped as I realized my phone's battery was nearly dead. I was trapped. Should I risk running to the garage or hide and wait for the police? As I hesitated, I felt a gut-wrenching sensation that I was being watched. My eyes darted to my car in the garage. Then I saw it, a man's face pressed against the rearview mirror, dead. Bulging white eyes stared back at me. A sickening yellow grin spread across his face. He waved slowly, the movement unnatural. I froze, paralyzed in fear. I had to get out. Just then my phone died, plunging me into total darkness. I couldn't breathe. My body shook uncontrollably. Then I heard it, the creak of the car door opening. I screamed, a high-pitched scream I didn't even recognize as my own, as I bolted for the garage door. The rain was now pouring down, soaking me to the bone. I scrambled up the driveway, desperate to escape. I ran to my neighbor's house, pounding on their door, pleading for help. They came out, confused and alarmed. And then, sirens. Police cars rolled down the street, their flashing lights lighting up the stormy night. 3 men, I gasped, breathless. They're in my house. The police arrived, guns drawn. They searched the house, but the men were gone. They had disappeared, leaving no trace, just some stolen antiques and nothing else. I thought I was safe, but then morning came. I was still shaking, unable to sleep. As I stood up from bed, something caught my eye. A small piece of paper was sticking out from beneath my pillow. I picked it up, and when I read what was written on it, I nearly collapsed. Bye-bye, beauty. You look cute when you sleep. So here's a question for you. Dear viewers, what do you think happened that night? Who was the man in my car? Was it a prank gone too far? Or something more sinister? Let me know what you think in the comments below. I'll be reading every single one. My wife and I bought a house in rural Missouri. It was built in 1997, and at first, it seemed like a peaceful retreat, far from the chaos of the city. But there was something about this house, something dark that we didn't understand at the time. The first owner passed away in 2022 after a long and painful illness. During his final days, he stayed in a room that wasn't the master bedroom, but the room where he had spent most of his time before he fell ill. After his passing, his wife lived there alone for many years. She didn't want to sell the house, but financial struggles forced her to let it go. When we bought the property, it was clear she hadn't been able to keep up with the maintenance. We were excited to make it our home, but something felt off. The house had once been a horse ranch, deep in the Missouri countryside. We moved in slowly at first, staying at a hotel about 20 miles away. While we worked to move our things into the house, the place was isolated, the kind of quiet you only get when you're miles from any other soul. One evening, as I moved into the house, I turned on a hallway light and left it on, expecting to find it glowing the next time I walked through. But when I returned, it was off. No big deal, right? Maybe I'd forgotten. I turned it back on. But then it happened again and again, 3 times in one day. Each time, the hallway light was mysteriously switched off, and every time, it was in the same spot, right by the room where the previous owner had stayed during his final months. This was the same room we were avoiding. We both felt it, this sense that something wasn't quite right. It was just the beginning. We were running errands, busy with the move, and didn't think much about it. That is, until something else happened. Earlier that day, I had gone into the house alone while my wife was still in the barn. We had left our dogs in the laundry room overnight, and when I returned, I went out onto the back patio. and opened the sliding door to let them out. But when I tried to open the laundry room door from the inside, it wouldn't budge. The handle was stuck. I tried and tried, but it was like something was holding it shut. The door wouldn't open at all, so I went back around to the front of the house and tried again. No problem. The door opened easily. It didn't make sense. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was just exhausted from the move, but it felt strange. I decided to leave the hallway light on again, hoping it would give me some sense of normalcy. We went out for dinner, and when we returned, the light was still on. It felt like a small victory, but things were about to escalate. We put our dogs in the laundry room that night before heading out to the hotel. When we returned the next day, we found the dogs had chewed through everything: furniture, bags, whatever they could get their paws on. But the weird part, the ADT alarm system, which is supposed to detect motion, didn't go off. And then the biggest question, how did the dogs get out? They weren't tall enough to pull down the handle to open the door, yet somehow the door was always wide open when we came back. But the strangest part, the door closed itself every time we arrived. This is where I need you to think. How could the dogs possibly close the door after getting out? It's a pull handle that swings inward. If the dogs couldn't open it, how could they close it? Could there have been something else in the house? Or worse, someone? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Things continued to get weirder. On the fourth night, I went to open the door to the bedroom where the man had stayed. As soon as I tried the handle, I realized it wouldn't move. It wasn't just stuck. It felt like something, or someone, on the other side, was pushing against it. I pushed harder, but the door wouldn't budge. Then just as I was about to give up, the handle suddenly gave way. It felt like someone had let go, as if they were standing there holding it, and then decided to let go at the last second. I froze. I couldn't breathe. I was so terrified. I almost ran outside to my wife, but I couldn't move. The silence was deafening. But it didn't stop there. A few weeks later, the house flooded, and we were forced to leave. We moved to California, thinking we'd get some peace. But even from miles away, the strange events didn't stop. The alarm system went off several times. Each time, we'd get a call from ADT, but when the police arrived, everything was secure. The door was locked. Nothing seemed out of place, but the eerie feeling in that house, it wouldn't go away. Even after we tried blessing the house, things continued to happen, and now I'm left with an unsettling truth. Evil definitely exists, but I don't want it anywhere near my home. I don't think we can ever go back. The previous owners, especially the wife, were hiding something about the house. I found an item they had left behind, something meant for a dead relative. In a moment of anger, I destroyed it, and now I can't find the missing pieces. Every night I can't shake the feeling that something is still there, watching. And here's the question I want to leave you with. What if the evil in that house wasn't just from the past owner's death, but from something far older, something buried deep beneath the house itself? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think is haunting this house? It was back in 2013 when I was 17. My family had been searching for a new place to live, and we finally found a house that seemed perfect. The owner was an older man who greeted us with a warm smile, talking about how he had built the house himself. He seemed pleasant enough, and I remember him sharing stories with my parents, laughing like an old friend. I stayed back, watching the conversation unfold. My parents were engaged with him, but there was something about the way he looked at them, something that felt off. As they continued chatting, there was a sudden pause in the conversation. I watched as the man's expression shifted, his face twisting from a friendly smile into the most sinister, hateful scowl I had ever seen. It was like I was looking at a completely different person. I don't think he noticed me, My head was down, so he probably thought I was distracted by my phone. But I wasn't. I was watching him the whole time. Just as quickly as it had changed, his expression returned to a pleasant smile. It was as if nothing had happened, and my parents didn't seem to notice, but I felt a chill run through me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right with him. Later that day, I told my mom what I had seen. She shrugged it off, saying maybe he was just socially awkward or had a moment of bad energy. I wanted to argue, but I didn't. After all, we had been looking for a house for so long, and this one felt like a great deal. We decided to go ahead and buy it. When we moved in, things felt normal at first. Everything seemed fine. But one Sunday morning, my family decided to go to church. I wasn't in the mood, so I decided to stay home. I didn't think anything of it. Just another quiet day in a new house. Around 11 a.m., things took a turn. I was upstairs in my room when I heard loud banging coming from outside. It was rhythmic, almost like someone was pounding on the side of the house. At first, I thought it was just the wind. There had been a storm the night before, but the sound was too deliberate, too loud to be natural. I ignored it, telling myself it was probably nothing, but then it stopped for a minute, and that's when I started hearing footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps downstairs. The creak of the floorboards echoed in the empty house, chairs scraping against the floor, kitchen cabinets opening and closing, the sound of the fridge door opening and closing. My heart pounded in my chest. I froze. I locked my bedroom door quietly, grabbed the baseball bat from the corner of the room, and dialed 911. My hands were shaking, but I managed to tell the operator what was happening. While I was on the call, I texted my mom. I tried to stay calm, but the fear was crawling up my spine. I could hear the footsteps getting closer, the sound of someone pacing outside my door, and then I heard something that froze me to my core. The door handle turned, but it stopped. Whoever it was standing there just outside. I could hear their breathing through the door, steady and heavy. I looked at my phone. My mom was still 30 minutes away. I was alone, in a house that I thought was safe. The pounding in my chest got louder. What should I do? What would you have done if you were in my place? Would you have confronted whoever was on the other side of that door? Or would you have waited, hoping they'd leave? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Back to the story. I couldn't breathe. My mind raced with fear. What if they forced their way in? I was just 5'2", barely 100 pounds. What if I couldn't stop them? The seconds dragged on forever, but then, finally, I heard the footsteps retreat. Slowly they faded, and the back door slammed shut. I waited, my breath shallow, until I heard the sirens outside. The 911 operator asked if I could let them in, or if they needed to break the door down. I rushed downstairs and let them in. But when they checked the house, there was no one. No signs of forced entry, no broken windows, nothing. It was as though the person or thing had just vanished. When my mom came home, she asked my stepdad if he had changed the locks. He hadn't, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the hallway. My mom had vacuumed the entire house earlier that morning, and the floor was spotless. But when the police checked the hallway outside my bedroom, they found something chilling. Huge shoe prints, bigger than anyone in our family could have made, and the prints stopped right outside my bedroom door. The police didn't go upstairs, so the prints couldn't be theirs, and there was no other way in. The next day, we changed the locks and added extra security, but nothing could shake the feeling that something was wrong with that house. Even now, when I think about it, my skin crawls. I can't forget how close I was to whoever, or whatever, was on the other side of that door.